Welcome back. Donald Trump is drawing large, very enthusiastic crowds. He's bringing people who aren't typically engaged into the political process, and he is winning. All the hallmarks of a typically successful primary candidate. And yet, Republican leaders are in full freak-out mode as they contemplate whether it's already too late to stop him. Washington Post reporter Jim Tankersley joins us now from the paper's newsroom downtown with more on this. Jim, thanks for your time. It is great to have you with us. There is no overstating just how frantic traditional GOP leaders have become in the last day or so. Tell us about this.
Well, first off, I would say there's a lot of panic or frantic, as you might put it, feeling among leading Republicans about Trump. There are talks of whether there would be a boycott of voting for him in the fall. A Nebraska senator yesterday became the first Republican senator to say he would not support Trump if he's the nominee. There is a real concern among GOP leaders that this could be a fissure, not just in their party overall, but moving forward. And now what we're also seeing is Republicans are fighting about whether he is someone they should rally behind. Chris Christie last week very prominently endorsed Trump. Yesterday, a senator from Alabama, Jeff Sessions, endorsed him, and this is going to just deepen if Trump wins a lot of states or all the states tonight as possible and has been predicted.
Mitch McConnell has been the Senate Majority Leader, Republican Mitch McConnell, has been telling his people, and we can presume he'll have a similar message for Republican challengers in states where there is a Democratic senator up for re-election this November. Do your own thing. If taking Trump on rather than embracing him is good for you, do it. Don't feel as though you're beholden to someone because you're running basically under the same banner. What does that reflect? And we might unfold into this part of the conversation Paul Ryan's comments as well, the House Speaker. What are congressional leaders worried about? What causes them to say what they've been saying?
Well, Paul Ryan came out this morning and denounced Trump for not denouncing the Ku Klux Klan fast enough. And I think this gets to a very fine line for Republicans. For a long time, many of them, including some of Trump's rivals in this race, such as Ted Cruz, basically said, Donald Trump is bringing new people to the process. Let's not criticize him. I'd rather vote for someone else, but let's not criticize him. He's expressing the anxieties of a lot of people. What you've seen in the last, particularly week, is many of those Republicans turning and saying, no, he's dangerous. He's appealing to people in a way that is not fundamentally conservative. And, with the case of the KKK, he's being racist in a way that they fear will turn voters off to the Republican Party and all sorts of other candidates in the party going forward. That's the anxiety in the Senate, is that Republicans could very conceivably lose their Senate majority if they have a bad cycle in the fall. And so I think that's what McConnell is telling his people, is that, hey, we want to win. And if running away from Trump is the way that you win, then that's probably what their candidates will do.
Donald Trump on the stump is clearly a spontaneous candidate, and that's part of the fun. That's what makes him someone who is tough to pull your eyes away from. Whatever your views, he just kind of draws you in, and you sit there. And many of us are captivated by Donald Trump, the political performer. And yet, there's a downside to this. On Friday, I think it was, he was asked about David Duke's endorsement, and he said, you want me to disavow? I disavow, okay? Which is not perhaps the most sincere of disavowals, but whatever. On paper, the words will look probably as they should. Then he gets into this whole thing with Jake Tapper on CNN over the weekend, where he says he needs to know more about this particular white supremacist before he can weigh in. And then the explanation lurches, perhaps somewhat bizarrely, into this notion of lousy earpiece. So spontaneity can be good until it's not so good. Right, Jim?
Yeah, and I think the thing that you have to remember with Trump is that for so many of the people who support him, they feel as if they haven't been listened to in the political process, or the political process hasn't worked for them, and that Trump is very different. And all of these ways are not traditional politician ways of behavior. And Trump has commanded the cameras in part by acting much more like a reality television star, and much less like a traditional politician. But in a weird way, that is what his voters are looking for in a politician. And I think, now we've seen, for example, Senator Rubio try to copy that. He's been very insulting of Trump on the stump the last few days, and it's gotten him more attention. He's gotten on TV more. It's not what Rubio has been doing up until this point, and it's a real question whether that will be enough for him to peel off Trump voters. And I think the other danger for Republicans here is if Trump loses, or if he wins the nomination but is abandoned by some conservatives in the fall and loses the general, there's the question of will those voters just feel more disenfranchised, more abandoned by traditional politicians if their guy doesn't make it all the way to the White House.
In watching commentary on the news, reading what conservative and right-leaning thought leaders and pundits and former officials, etc., are posting on the internet, you see things that we weren't talking about a week ago or a month ago, and that certainly are not a part of a typical cycle. Will the party break apart? Would losing be good because we can sort of cleanse ourselves of this craziness that's embedded in the moment and get sort of back to where we belong as a mainstream political party with mainstream ideas and much more civil back and forth? I've been struck by, again, I called it in the introduction a freak out. In the last 48 hours, the freak out factor is really unlike anything I can recall having seen before.
Well, particularly in this age of social media, it's just, I think it's very new for us to see this sort of a mass, like you say, freak out or a mass anxiety being vented by the elite thinkers of a party, whether that's, writers on very prominent conservative websites or very prominent conservative thinkers or economic advisors or whatever. There's this realization that suddenly set in that he may very well win the nomination, that he's an 80% favorite now in prediction markets to win the nomination. And that has caused them to do this massive self-reflection about, wait, how did we get here? What do we do? How can we stop this? And again, it may be too late for them to do that because he has amassed such elite. Now, there's still a lot of time left in the nominating process, and there's certainly many different paths you could design where Republicans deny Trump a majority at the convention, and then it gets crazy from there.
A Cruz victory in Texas, if Kasich is able to pull out a victory in Ohio, if Rubio, and I guess this would really be a come-from-behind victory in terms of what the polls are telling us is the case in the Sunshine State, a Rubio victory in Florida, this leaves the door open, but there are a lot of ifs embedded in that scenario I just laid out, which I think is why, as strong as the pushback against Trump that we're seeing right now is, embedded in there is a sense that, at a minimum, this should all have come a few weeks ago, perhaps a month ago. Not that we all haven't been taken by surprise by the Trump phenomenon, but for folks to be coming to the realizations that are hitting them now is really after the horse and the cart and all the rest of it are well out of the barn.
Right, and I think the way to think of it is, going forward, most of the primaries are winner-take-all, which means there's a lot of room for someone to catch fire, beat Trump in all those primaries, and win the nomination. But for that to happen, the simplest way to think of it is someone has to catch fire and win all those primaries, and that would be a dramatic shift from what we've seen so far in the race. I mean, Trump has won everything except Iowa, and he could win everything today or everything but Texas. And so this is the question. How does a race change like that basically overnight, which is what they need for it to happen? We
have about a minute left. Are we going to look back at this? Granted, it's been a wild and woolly and crazy campaign, but to the extent that we can pick out one moment and say, wow, are we going to look back at this issue of the white supremacist support as being relatively pivotal?
Maybe. I mean, if he loses, I think we will. I think if he loses, we'll look back at that, and we'll look back at Marco Rubio's shift in the debate before Super Tuesday and see the way that he adopted sort of the Trump persona, the insulting, the heavy attacks. If he wins, I think we'll look back much further. I think we might look back, for example, to Scott Walker dropping out and calling on other candidates to do so quickly because he was starting to get worried about this. Looks very prescient right now. If the field had thinned faster, maybe there were only one or two real opponents to Trump early on, we might not have seen these same sorts of results.
It'll be fascinating to continue to watch the numbers coming in from the balloting that's taking place around the country, including in Virginia today. And we've got a big contest coming just 1 week from now. So between now, the 8th, we'll include the 15th as well because of Ohio. It is a very intense and very potentially impactful time. Reporter Jim Tankersley of the Washington Post joining us from the paper's beautiful new newsroom down on 13th on K Street. Thank you so much for your time. Good to talk with you again.
Thanks, my pleasure.
We'll step aside, back there with more News Talk after this.